We are live on YouTube. Let's get going on TikTok as well. Okay. We are... What's going on here? Hello? Hold on. Let's stop this. Okay, we're live now, I think, on TikTok. Let's get this set up. Okay. Okay. Let me just give it 1 second to announce on the Discord that I'm live. Okay. Okay. Let me just close this. And we can get started. Hey, brother, where you been getting any good news for us? Well, before we cover the news, we're going to try to do some research first because the news cycle right now, especially with foreign policy, is moving a million miles an hour. And especially when foreign policy stuff happens, it feels like everyone has like a 100% conviction and like 1% knowledge, which by the way applies to me as well. Like I've always said foreign policy is so much more complicated than domestic policy. There's always something you missed or like didn't know. So what's up, Aru Maru, and hi, it's me on YouTube. If you're watching on TikTok, I'm also live right now on YouTube. What's up, I'm Degrader? Oh yeah, this guy's awesome. His debate AI thing is sick. Okay, yeah, so we'll get started. We're not really doing debates today because, again, I don't know enough about this stuff to be debating it, honestly. And I feel like a lot of people that debate it don't, but... hold on. I have a couple documentaries I have queued up that I want to watch. Because before I start sharing one thing I can say, this war was done without congressional approval. And Trump is an incompetent person. So just off rip, I don't support what's happening here, right? Not to mention I believe, civilians that have been killed by these actions. So that goes without saying. But what I'm curious about, which is like a little bit less straightforward, is like what are the broader implications of this for the Middle East? Which hopefully we can learn with some PBS Frontline documentaries. I don't know if this is the content people watch me for, but it's the content you're getting today at least. Okay. Hold on. How do I... Let's expand this a little bit. Oh, wait, I see the issue. This needs to be under this, and then we can... There we go. I think that's good enough. Right? Okay. I have here, and we're going to watch this at like 1.25, maybe 1.5 speed. Do we know if the Gang of 8 was alerted well ahead of time? I feel like I did read that they were alerted. I don't know how far in advance they were alerted. Dude, the news, maybe this is just me, the news feels impossible to keep track of. Every 2 minutes, there's a video of some building exploding. Half of them are AI videos, by the way, or videos from like 5 or 10 or 20 years ago, which isn't even relevant to today. And then you have all these people who are... like prognosticating about this who don't know much about it, which is why I'm trying to like kind of hold off on it and try to learn a little bit before I start giving high intensity takes on this. It's so hard to keep track of what's going on and who did what. Oh, this was launched by Israel. Actually, no, it was Iran. Actually, no, it was this. It's like there's so much. So we are going to cover the news, but before we cover the news, we're going to cover the history, because you can't speak about foreign policy until you understand the history of the foreign policy, you know? Okay. What's going on here? Okay. Lock in Dr. Hassan for Texas Senate. Yeah, people are counting him out. He's going to make the comeback of the century. I should be on Mr. Attorney General Okra's stream later today to be covering the Texas Senate primary, which is going to be fun. This is going to be super fun. Hold on. Okay. Sorry about the delay. Okay. Rob says your opinion isn't worth poop. Well, Rob, thank you so much for sharing. Thanks for watching. Okay. Hold on. I see the issue. Hold on. Let's connect. Make sure the chat is showing up on TikTok. If you're enjoying live, make sure double tapping the screen, sharing, following, joining the Discord, Cash App, PayPal are both Linktree in my bio. Let's get started on this.
An epic journey through the most war-torn region in the world.
Chaos has suddenly expanded into a dangerous regional war with Iran on one side.
This is an older documentary, by the way, and I tend to really like PBS Frontline. I think they do a good job of speaking to parties on different sides of a conflict to get their perspective on it. So, to the extent that there's bias, y'all can let me know in the chat, and we'll try to cover all the bases we can. But this is from 6 years ago, so I'm sure a lot has changed. But as far as I can tell, a lot of the tensions right now is not just Israel versus Iran. It's also kind of like Saudi Arabia versus Iran, which is that's like its own whole thing.
Maybe on the other.
Two well-armed rivals, and neither side appears willing to back down.
The Saudis insist that Iran is a hostile, belligerent, adventurous nation attempting to export revolution around the region. How do you respond?
Talk is cheap. Saudis helped Al-Qaeda. Saudis are funding terrorists. So they started this sectarian message, not us.
The Iranians say you've been busy supporting extremism. What's your response to that?
Nonsense. The Iranians are the ones who are exporting terrorism. They're the ones who are stoking the fires of sectarianism. They are the ones who have been on an aggressive path.
Off rip, can it be both? I'm sure the guy representing Saudi Arabia and Iran, neither of them is going to take any responsibility. But this idea that it's only Saudi Arabia or it's only Iran, how about both? I'm sure both are doing things in this region, which we're going to learn more about.
They're the ones who are stoking the fires of sectarianism. They are the ones who have been on an aggressive path since 1979.
From the Iranian Shia revolution that ignited
I will say purely fit check wise, I don't know how appropriate this is, but the Iranians have way better fit than I don't. If you compare this to the turban that the Ayatollah wears, it's so much harder what they wear in Iran, the government there. So on fit alone, I'm going to give it 1-0 right now to Iran, but we'll keep watching. We'll get into geopolitics.
Arabia.
Khomeini described the rulers of the Gulf as being like the Shah, who must be toppled.
Frontline traces the roots of a deadly divide.
It is a power struggle between Iran and Saudi Arabia for dominance of the Middle East and the Muslim world.
Iranian and Saudi citizens aren't the ones that are suffering. There's been over 1 million casualties in the Middle East over the last decade. They've been Syrian, they've been Iraqi, they've been Yemeni.
As the rhetoric escalates, as the proxy wars escalate, neither side seems to appreciate that they're destroying the region.
Filmed in 7 countries with correspondent Martin Smith.
Which,
Part 1.
That's kind of how proxy wars work, which is the problem with proxy wars. The same thing that happened during the Cold War, which is when you have, especially these two powers that are going at it, and they're using other countries as like a chessboard, and they're using other governments as pawns, they're never internalizing the cost of that. They're never internalizing or contending with the human value or like the infrastructural damage that this causes. So that is just by definition the problem with proxy wars, which is I feel like it's probably a feature of geopolitics for all of history, that there's these smaller states or smaller groups of people that are used as pawns for greater empires or greater geopolitical powers to be able to make moves against each other without actually encroaching on each other's mainland.
Of a Frontline special series, Bitter Rivals.
Lock in. We're trying to, before we get into opinions and politics, we're here to learn. We're students today, okay? I will say, PBS Frontline is so sick. Their documentaries are so good.
I've reported from the Middle East for nearly 2 decades, yet I've never visited Tehran before. I've come here to report on the intense rivalry between Shia Iran and its Sunni neighbor, Saudi Arabia. It's been nearly 40 years since Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini led a revolution that toppled the US-backed monarchy. Ever since, relations with the outside world have been strained. For an American journalist, it's not easy to report here.
My understanding, my very surface level understanding of like Iranian history, which is why I'm doing the research, is because my understanding is very surface level, is you had, was his name Mossadegh or something, that was trying to nationalize the oil. Then you had him basically being replaced by the Shah, who was like a more Western aligned, but more like dictatorial power. And then you had the Islamic Revolution where the Ayatollah took over, and there's this massive anti-Western, anti-imperial sentiment, which was kind of like the animating ethos of that revolution. But that's a very rudimentary understanding.
Authoritarian state. It takes courage for Iranians to speak out. Many have been jailed for opposing the government.
One of the sites that we are going to see on the 22nd when Imam Khomeini has his lecture.
My guide is Sasan. Usually, Sasan works with tourists.
Bro, these Trump glazers are such bots, and this might legitimately be a bot. I haven't even said anything about Trump. I'm trying to learn about Middle Eastern geopolitics. Bro comes in, Trump is a hero on the world stage. Okay, bro. Get it out of your throat. You're going to cough.
But he has been assigned to me by a media agency that operates on behalf of the government.
I don't know who Richard Kahn is. I'm not related to Richard Kahn.
Who is this man we're going to see? This gentleman. Yes, tell me.
We've given them a list of people we hope to meet, but it's not clear who the government will actually approve.
Okay, this is definitely a bot, and he's getting muted.
It's one of the living history of the Iranian revolution. And me as an Iranian, this is the first time I'm going to see him from the very close in person.
The man we're going to visit today, Mohsen Rafiqdoust, is a founder of Iran's powerful Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. Today, as a result of his connections, he is one of the wealthiest men in Iran, with stakes in hundreds of companies. In the late 70s, he led protests against Iran's unpopular Shah, preparing for the day Ayatollah Khomeini would return from exile. On February 1st, 1979, Rafiqdoust was in charge of Khomeini's security.
الان 38 سال گذشته من یاد اون روز که میافتم هر وقت که صحبت میشه از نظر احساسات تغییر میکنم به هیجان میام.
Iran's Western-backed monarch, the Shah, had left the country on what he said was a vacation. Khomeini seized the moment.
I feel like I remember learning in high school about the Shah a lot in our history classes, and this is where I'm going to talk to the chat a lot because I'm sure there's people that are watching that know more about this than I do. Wasn't the Shah like someone who really tried to westernize Iran in terms of like the culture? But simultaneously, he was like very authoritarian and like very dictatorial. So it's like we're going to bring in the capitalism and the Western dress code, but also no civil rights. That's my understanding of it.
Through your mind and in your heart about what this meant for the country.
این یه عمومیت داشت برای همه اون بین 6 تا 8 میلیون نفری که در مراسم استقبال شرکت داشتن.
Attorney General Okra in the chat, lock in.
وقتی که امام رو دیدم احساس کردم که هر چه خوبی در دنیا هست رو در یک قالب شخص دارم می‌بینم.
And in your heart about what this meant for the country.
این یه عمومیت داشت برای همه اون بین 6 تا 8 میلیون نفری که در مراسم استقبال شرکت داشتن.
I have to say it. Purely drip-wise, purely fit check-wise, Iran just crushes Saudi Arabia. There's no one in Saudi Arabian leadership with this kind of drip. I'm not defending Iran, obviously, but like this, I'm just gonna say, like it's not even really close. This is some shit like you would see Playboy Cardi pull up in, or like Yeet, and it would be going viral on Twitter. He was ahead of the times. What is it with authoritarian regimes and sometimes having like crazy fit design and like set design? The aesthetics they were locked in on the aesthetics.
The people were in a frenzy to catch just a glimpse of the man they revere like a god. They clawed and clambered and ran to see and be near him for 15 miles, and no more than a tiny fraction of the multitude succeeded.
This is crazy aura to have before the advent of social media. This is what you'd see if like I Show Speed pulled up to like New York City, or like that one time where like Lil Uzi Vert pulled up and like the whole street was filled. Bro was doing this in the late 20th century before we even had Twitter. That's crazy.
الانم 76 سال عمرمه. اون 3 ساعت و 20 دقیقه رو برای خودم پرفایده ترین و ارزشمندترین زمان عمرم میدونم.
Later that same day, Khomeini gave his first major address to the Iranian people. It was a rejection of British and American domination of the Shah's Iran.
This is, we're going to learn more about his governing style, but this is like a very common thing I see with authoritarians. Power to the people, which means actually power to me because I am the manifestation of the people. Trump says this all the time too. I have a mandate for you, the people, which means give me all the power. Okay. He's a predecessor of the freshly not alive leader. I don't know what the chain of rule is. He was the first Ayatollah. He came in after the Shah was toppled. The Shah was installed by the West because the previous government there was like, I think, more communist or socialist, and they wanted to nationalize the oil, which I'm sure private interests and state actors in the West had a problem with. So, yeah, a lot of the issues in the Middle East are because of, from my understanding, Western overreach. Yeah. Which it's hard for people to hold simultaneously in their mind. If I say this, certain foreign policy types are going to say, oh, are you justifying the Hezbollah and Hamas and Al-Qaeda? And I'm like, I'm not justifying you, but if you want to address these things, you have to understand where they come from, right?
Now use religion to reorder every aspect of Iranian life. And he declared that Islam was fundamentally
it's crazy how much our modern world is shaped by like the post-World War II and especially the Cold War era, right? Where like my understanding is during the Cold War, South America, the Middle East, East Asia, these were chessboards for the U.S. and Soviet Union to try to battle for influence, right? And it's like these massive geopolitical powers are never going to feel the human cost or even really the economic cost of these pawns, for lack of a better term, had to endure for their larger schemes.
Whole notion of monarchy. His message was a direct assault on kings from the Gulf states to Saudi Arabia. Iranians believed it was the end of decades of autocratic rule and repression.
I don't know if that was true.
I believe the revolution was a demand for dignity on the part of the Iranian people. They wanted recognition for who they were, for their history, for their identity.
Do you think Americans generally understand the Iranian experience prior to the revolution?
I guess not. I believe the American people have not been subjected to the type of indignation and lack of respect that the people of Iran were subjected to.
Today, both the peaceful economy and the defensive strength of the free world are heavily dependent upon the petroleum resources of Iran.
As the Iranians tell it, there were decades of exploitation and abuse. The West had relied upon Iran to supply much of its oil.
Has supplied more than a quarter of Britain's needs.
The British had commandeered a near monopoly of Iranian oil profits.
Iran becomes the center of a major international crisis.
Then, in 1951, Mohammad Mossadegh was nominated by Iran's parliament to lead the country's first democratically elected government. After Mossadegh nationalized Iran's British-run oil industry and chased the Shah from Tehran, the CIA and British spies engineered a coup in 1953. A near monopoly of Iranian oil profits.
Iran becomes the center of a major international crisis.
Then, in 1951, Mohammad Mossadegh was nominated by Iran's parliament to lead the country's first democratically elected government.
Okay.
After Mossadegh nationalized Iran's British-run oil industry and chased the Shah from Tehran, the CIA and
So was the Shah in charge before Mossadegh came in? And then I guess he was reinstalled afterwards?
Spies engineered a coup in 1953. The CIA and British spies engineered a coup in 1953.
Nice.
Mossadegh was arrested, imprisoned, and lived in captivity for 14 years until his death.
We're not so great at history in America. When we say that's history, it's a pejorative. Well, the rest of the world takes history pretty seriously. And 1953 definitely resonated in 1979. It resonates today.
The Shah was reinstalled. To stay in power, he built a massive police state and relied on the West for support.
Iran, because of the great leadership of the Shah, is an island of stability in one of the more troubled areas of the world.
Isn't this very similar? I mean, similar in a sense to what we talk about with Venezuela, where you had these private oil companies, and then you had the leader of the government who was like democratically installed, who was like, we're actually going to nationalize. This is on YouTube as well. If you're enjoying the live on TikTok, you can watch on YouTube. It's a much better layout, in my opinion. But you have constantly situations where, listen, under the idea of having sovereignty, a state should be allowed to nationalize its oil or its resources. You can take issue with that economically. I think there's many issues with just nationalizing certain sectors, economically speaking. You can go to the link tree in my bio. My YouTube's there, my Discord's there, everything's there. Link tree in my bio. Follow up above, join the Discord, it's all free. This seems to be a common theme.
Aside from flattery, was military might.
The U.S. sold him weapons, and the CIA trained the Shah's secret police, the Savak, which brutally suppressed all opposition.
During the trouble, I saw the police beating passers-by indiscriminately with their sticks.
By 1970,
CIA was on some crazy fuck shit in the 20th century, especially. Not that they're not now, but there's been like some reforms, I guess, and there's more. Like, just broadly speaking, there's like now there's FISA courts and there's all these things, but man, they were really unrestrained in the mid to late 20th century.
The country
it's
was
kind of
convulsed
insane.
with protests. The people wanted control of their own destiny.
The fact is, the Shah has failed to make civilian government work. And until a proper solution is found here, there can be no satisfactory form of government for Iran.
Then came 1979 and Khomeini's revolution. Its impact was felt across the Middle East, wherever unpopular elites were supported by the U.S.
A huge mob armed with rifles and shotguns and screaming, "Kill the American dogs," stormed the U.S. Embassy compound in Islamabad and set parts of it afire.
1979 was a crucial year, I think, for the Muslim world. I mean, Sunnis were celebrating the Iranian Revolution as much as Shias were. There was enormous enthusiasm and support, because Khomeini's initial line was not sectarian against Sunnis as such, it was anti-American.
Iran today saw the biggest demonstration yet. More than 1 million persons marched through the streets shouting, "Death to the Shah, death to Carter."
Khomeini's vision was to annihilate America's presence from the Middle East. He wanted this Islamic revolution of his.
This is the issue, by the way, when we talk about like different types of world orders, whether it's like a unipolar world order or a bipolar world order or a multipolar world order, the cost of having one dominant global superpower or two dominant global superpowers that are constantly in some kind of cold proxy war is that all the other countries still exist. All the other people still exist. You can't just step on them forever and expect that resentment to not bubble up and eventually come back and bite you in the ass. It's not sustainable. Put aside whatever moral things you want to say about it. Just purely strategically, if you don't take people seriously and you just use them for long enough, eventually it's going to come back to bite you in the ass. That seems to be the common theme of like geopolitics throughout history.
And to see the end of Western influence, cultural, political, military, financial, in the entire Islamic world.
And the reason I say take the morality out of it for a second is like a lot of these, like, I don't know, like, you don't get it, bro. Like, you're too soft for geopolitics. We have to be strategically minded. Okay, sure, let's talk about strategy. How is it strategically minded to make everyone fucking hate you? What's the strategy there? Oh, well, we have the better military. Okay. That doesn't mean they can't rise up and do something, whether it's economically or even just being like a thorn in your side. This is not even smart to do.
It just provides
hindsight's 2020.
Example that people without any foreign help were able to engage a very brutal regime supported primarily by the United States and defeat it.
To this day, loyal regime supporters gather to celebrate their revolution. They march down Inqilab or Revolution Street every February 11th.
What brings you here today? My country is the best country in all over the world.
What makes your country the best country in all of the world?
Almost 4 decades of indoctrination have ritualized these anti-American sentiments.
Hello, my name is Martin. How do you do?
But what we didn't expect is how everyone went out of their way to welcome an American reporter.
I like all the people in the USA.
They make a distinction.
My God. Based? Who made this? Who is this? That's fire. This is good to know. I'm glad the people in Iran know, bro, that shit was Trump. That was not me. It was not anyone. Just leave us out of this, bro. This is between y'all and Trump and just, hey, whatever.
Away in protest against the regime, but government employees are expected to attend.
Oh my God, what a big.
Compared to the passions of 1979, the whole march had a kind of carnival feel to it. There were plenty of anti-Western posters, with all those familiar slogans.
Listen, I'm not endorsing any of the authoritarianism of Iran, which I'm very certain exists. Like it, you can both simultaneously say that U.S. intervention in the Middle East, especially that done with no plan and no congressional authorization, but even outside of that is horrible. At the same time, doesn't make Iran good. But also, putting both those things aside, this is just fucking funny. This is really cool. Hold on. That's going in a thumbnail one day.
More than anything, the march was about pride and defiance.
Who is bro on the right? I feel like I've seen the people on the... Who is this?
But in the beginning, it was not clear if this revolution would survive. It was the American hostage crisis that would help Khomeini secure its future.
The American embassy in Tehran is in the hands of Muslim students tonight. Spurred on by an anti-American speech by the Ayatollah Khomeini, they stormed the embassy, fought the Marine Guards for 3 hours, overpowered them, and took dozens of American hostages.
The fear was that the United States was preparing to reinstall the Shah. A small group of students reacted.
The hostages are in our hands, and we protect
Masume Eftekar was a spokesperson for the students.
so that in the case of any military intervention, we will destroy them.
Yeah.
The students, they believe that there is a serious possibility
We will
that what
destroy
happened in
them.
1953,
Holy
the
shit.
coup d'etat, could again happen. History could repeat itself.
Militant Muslim students today vowed to kill the 49 American hostages if the U.S. launches a military attack against Iran. Their demand remains the same: return the Shah to stand trial.
The taking of the hostages was initially prompted when President Carter reluctantly granted the Shah permission to enter a U.S. hospital.
The former Shah of Iran is suffering from cancer and is receiving needed treatment in this country.
The United States gave refuge to the person who had imprisoned thousands of people, who had killed thousands of people on the streets of Tehran. He was a mass murderer. Yet the United States let him into their country, took him to a hospital, and then they expected the Iranian students not to show outrage.
The Iranians burned the
Fair.
United States flag and denounced the U.S. government.
Not the hostage taking, but the resentment. Very fair.
The students, they thought that they would take the embassy for a few hours maybe. But then suddenly the people poured out in millions in support of this. And suddenly Imam supported it to
Khomeini.
Yeah, Imam Khomeini.
شما می‌بینید که الان مرکز فساد امریکا را جوان‌ها رفتن گرفتن و امریکایی هم که در اونجا بوده گرفتن و اون لانه فساد را به دست آوردن و امریکا هم غلطی نمی‌کنه.
Imam Khomeini, he named this overwhelming response of the people, he named it as the Second Revolution. He used it to actually construct the political institutions of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
This was a tactical ploy to take the embassy, to demonstrate revolutionary credentials in the face of the great Satan. We were just a useful tool. And the regime
Make sure you guys are double tapping the screen, following, sharing.
After the hostage crisis, Khomeini was fully empowered. Post-colonial Middle Eastern states had embraced nationalism, capitalism, and communism. But with Khomeini's revolution, Iran was embracing Islam.
Before 79, Islam as a political phenomenon was a marginal idea in the region. The Arab world was all about socialism and Arab nationalism, and Iran was dominated by secular forces. Now, once Khomeini takes over, Islam is squarely put in the middle of the table in the Middle East.
A few hours south of Tehran.
Yeah, what's his name? Mossadegh, who is the one who nationalized the oil. Was he more of like a secular leader? It's kind of the vibe I got.
Is the holy city of Qom, Iran's preeminent center of Shia learning.
Good, okay. Then you go to the office of the Ullah. If you want to interview anything, we
Okay, great. Perfect.
See.
Thank you.
I wanted to talk to an Ayatollah here about Khomeini's revolution.
After Islamic revolution, there is a movement towards religion, towards God. And there is a new role for the religion in all the issues, global issues, international issues.
I wonder how many people we're going to see in this documentary are just dead now. Like, that's fucking crazy. Link in bio isn't working for me. Try copy and pasting it into like a browser. Sometimes it won't open up
Revolution
within TikTok.
established that Islamic law, Sharia, would now govern Iran. And Khomeini determined that a cleric should rule as its head. A cleric who received his authority directly from God.
We believe that imams They are guided by God, and therefore they are able to show us the right path. And this is the idea of Shia.
Shia are a minority sect, around 12% of all Muslims. They split from the majority Sunnis 1,400 years ago, following the death of the Prophet Muhammad.
When the Prophet Muhammad died in 632, a dispute emerged over who would succeed him. The Sunnis believed that the leadership of the Muslim state and community would go to his best friend and companion, a man called Abu Bakr. But the Shi'is believed that Ali, the cousin, should have succeeded the Prophet.
Shia means followers of Ali, and they developed a doctrine that Ali and his successors were infallible representatives of God.
He had a certain quality that was similar to that of the Prophet in that he was impeccable or made no errors. He was error-free. The Sunnis never agreed to this.
While in exile, Khomeini took this Shia belief and formulated a new kind of government around it. He called the principle Walayat al-Faqih, the guardianship of the jurist.
What Khomeini did was that he politicized what was until then much more of a religious/spiritual doctrine and turned it into a political doctrine whereby a jurist, a legal and theological scholar, could actually rule a state.
Many Shia scholars believed Khomeini
Not good,
had gone
but
too
smart.
far.
He would rule the country and he would have ultimate and final say over all matters. And if he issues a command in his capacity as the supreme leader of Iran, then obeying him is required and disobeying him is a sin.
It says why mixing religion and governance is always a very, very bad recipe, regardless of what the religion is. It's just not good.
He declared his Islamic revolution
because
in
it
the name
creates
of
an
all
incentive structure that is like you can never really go against the government without being labeled some kind of existential threat to like the will of God.
Muslims, Shia and Sunni.
Same problem with Christian
But
nationalism.
That's not how others saw it.
The revolution had two sides. Certainly rhetorically, the Khomeinist revolution, the 1979 revolution, was pan-Islamic. But right below that rhetoric, these were Shia clerics taking over a country and remaking that country by the ideas, the beliefs, the mores of the Shia clergy. So it was inextricably Shia. It was outwardly Shia. And all of Iran's neighbors saw this. Even if it had sort of pan-Islamic ambitions, it was very much a Shia experiment.
The fact that Khomeini carried out the revolution in the name of Islam was a source of his popularity and power in the Arab world. The fact that he was a Shia ruler was also the limit of his power. And it's at that limit that the Saudis, Pakistanis, Egyptians, Jordanians used in order to make sure the Iranian revolution doesn't spread.
No country feared the spread of Khomeini's revolution more than here, across the Gulf, Saudi Arabia. It was a direct challenge for the leadership of the Islamic world and to the royal house of Saud. Until 1979, the Saudi royal family maintained relations with Iran. The two countries were both Western-backed oil-rich monarchies that the U.S. saw as pillars of Gulf security.
We had very good relations with the Shah, especially in his later years. I remember before Khomeini came, I had gone to Tehran to see the Shah. And I remember driving to his palace, Yerevan Palace. It was after dusk, and there were no lights in the palace because there had been a strike by the oil workers, and there was no fuel for the generators. And it was very indicative of what was happening in Tehran, that he was losing his authority.
So there's a big question mark. Khomeini comes to Tehran, and you must have been listening carefully to his words.
Absolutely. Khomeini described the rulers of the Gulf as being like the Shah, who must be toppled.
Khomeini really rattles the Saudis because the supreme leader was in essence undermining the Saudi royal family's own credentials as the leaders of the Muslim world, because they are home to Mecca and Medina, the two holy sites in Islam. This is what gives them a leadership role in the Middle East.
An absolute monarchy, the Saudi royal family retains control over everything, from the country's oil to the news media. This is the 5th time I've reported from here. In 2005, I was allowed a rare visit inside the royal palace in Riyadh. It was the occasion of a majlis, where the kingdom subjects come for a royal audience. It reveals a lot about how this country is governed. Crown Prince Abdullah bin Abdulaziz, a son of the kingdom's founder, was then the de facto ruler. To one side sat Sunni Wahhabi clerics, guardians of tradition who habitually resist change. On his other side, the royal family, allies to the West. These are the partners in power. After the clerics and the royals paused to pray together, I took the chance of asking the Crown Prince about his family's claim to power. I'd like to just ask you a couple of questions. He barely responded.
What is the legitimacy of the monarchy based upon?
الشرعية هي العقيدة الإسلامية والإسلام والقرآن الكريم.
In fact, their legitimacy is rooted in the deal made at the founding of the Saudi state in 1932. King Abdulaziz ibn Saud, in order to unify the warring tribes of Arabia.
Okay, I will say, I said that Iran had better grip than Saudi Arabia. This guy seems to be the exception. I'm liking this. I'm liking the fit.
Saud, in order to unify the warring tribes of Arabia, signed a pact with fundamentalist Wahhabi clerics. The Wahhabis follow the teachings of an 18th century Islamic cleric, Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, who had demanded a return to an older, harsher faith.
Being harsh, that reflects the circumstances of Arabia in the 18th century. You know, when religious political movement starts, always at the beginning, they are very austere, very conservative, very harsh, very radical.
Wahhabism really is an extremely Puritan form of Islam. The Wahhabis believe that Islam has to be cleansed of all the accoutrements, that there has to be very literal interpretation of the text, and they are very intolerant about people who don't agree with it.
In Riyadh, I listened as Saudi Arabia's highest religious...
So what I'm getting so far is you have two governments who are both trying to use religion to launder their alleged legitimacy and establish their sole claim to being leaders of the Muslim world in the Middle East, although even saying the Muslim world neglects all the differences that exist.
Authority, the Grand Mufti, warned his faithful against deviation. The Mufti is a direct descendant of Abdul Wahhab. Fundamentalist Sunnis believe in a direct personal connection between a believer and God. They abhor the Shia embrace of clerical hierarchy, saints, shrines, and icons.
I never realized this. Isn't this very similar to the divide? Maybe I'm completely off on this, between Protestants and Catholics, right? Where Catholics are a lot more like you have all these rituals and all these buildings and all these intermediaries, and then Protestants are like, nah, it's just a straight line between you and God. That's an interesting parallel I never really considered
Wahhabism
before.
has a very stark anti-Shia perspective. There's no nuance with its perspective on Shiism. Shiites are heretics. Shiism is a heretical strain, which makes them effectively non-Muslims. They're not part of the tent.
Throughout the 1970s, the royal family faced dual challenges. They were trying to modernize the country and maintain their alliance with the Wahhabi clerics.
One of the teachings of Islam is that every Muslim should at least once make a pilgrimage to Mecca.
Their guardianship of the two holy mosques of Mecca and Medina had always been their greatest responsibility.
The fact that Mecca is the source and the shrine of Islam gives Saudi Arabia a central place in the Islamic world.
But then in November 1979, the Grand Mosque of Mecca came under terrorist attack.
15,000 pilgrims were praying at dawn when the 30 giant doors were sealed off by hundreds of members of a Muslim sect. The first pictures of the siege showed gunfire from the minarets of the Muslim world's holiest shrine. An eyewitness said he heard machine guns and explosions, possibly grenades, within the mosque compound.
The Saudi leadership saw this as a challenge to the security and the stability of the kingdom.
6,000 or 7,000 pilgrims remain inside the buildings.
That's a fucked up thing to make a 6-7
It was just days after the hostage crisis in Iran began. The assumption in the West was that Iran or Iranian-inspired Shiites were to blame. Khomeini shot back, blaming the Americans.
Khomeini, for his part, is blaming the United States for the Muslim extremist takeover in the Holy Mosque.
The Saudis soon found out that the attack was led by a young Saudi militant, part of a fringe group of Wahhabi extremists.
The gunmen seek to purify the religion from what they say is the corrupt influence of the current Saudi Arabian government.
Then things went from bad to worse, and this time Iran was involved. In the oil-rich eastern province, thousands of Shia took to the streets in protest. This is what the royals had always feared.
The Saudis rightly feared that the Shia population in the eastern provinces, where all of their oil is, are very quickly going to gravitate towards Iran, and they may become rebellious, they may become secessionists.
A minority politically and economically excluded for years, Saudi Shias waved pictures of Khomeini and demanded that Riyadh grant them more rights. They were encouraged by Iranian radio stations. Radio stations in Iran called for the Shia to
It's
rise.
crazy how the advent of like radio alone and then television and the internet afterwards completely reshaped like political mobilization. It like expanded the reach, and now we're at a different fucking level with Twitter, but it's crazy to see how this was unfolding even in like the 70s, 80s, 90s.
I was a student. You were a student. Do you remember it?
Yes.
What was your reaction then?
It's not their business to interfere in our affairs. The Saudis, who are Shia, are Saudi citizens. They belong to the Saudi state. Their loyalty is to the Saudi state. And Iran or nobody else either has the right to interfere. We don't go and try to provoke minorities in Iran. We don't go and try to provoke the Sunnis in Iran into taking up arms against the Iranian state.
We did not take action against any country today.
The Iranians see it differently.
We made our views clear about the nature of
Wait till this guy hears about the printing press. I've never heard of that one before. I'll have to look into it.
That were submissive to the United States, governments that were presenting a message of hatred.
But back in 1979, there were radio reports coming out of Iran calling for Shia in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia to rise up against the monarchy.
Well,
that sounds like interference to me.
We always rejected the use of force against governments. We may have encouraged people to ask for their rights.
To crush the uprising, the Saudis...
The way he sees, like, all right, we didn't really encourage the violence, but, like, you know, a little bit here and there.
That sounds like interference to me.
We always rejected the use of force against governments. We may have encouraged
Not the
people
smirk.
to ask for their rights.
To crush the uprising, the Saudis pulled whole battalions of National Guard away from Mecca and brutally suppressed the protests.
Damn, I don't know.
With
if
heavy
I can
weapons
show
and
that.
explosives. And with permission from the Wahhabi clerics.
A religious council had to be convened to permit the assault on the holy mosque.
Saudi troops have been conducting a mop-up operation there after driving out all but a handful of Muslim gunmen.
Scores of rebels were killed.
Muslim.
Among those captured was the ringleader, Juhayman al-Otaibi. Juhayman and his followers had been outraged by recent social changes and liberalization condoned by the royal family. Over the previous decade, the monarchy had permitted a gradual loosening of religious rules. Women had been given prominent roles in the media and were anchoring news programs
How
without head
dare
coverings.
they?
Western brands, pop culture, and
That's
luxury
actually
goods
crazy.
flooded it.
From having women with no hijab on TV to, like, until very recently, they didn't have the right to drive in Saudi Arabia. The complete 180 shift, whether it's from the Shah to the Ayatollah or from the status quo here before the attack on the holy city versus after, it's very interesting.
As the thirst for oil grows bigger, Saudi Arabia gets richer and richer and richer. But Western money has brought Western attitudes along with it. Last year, revenue from oil...
The 1970s oil boom was very disruptive to a traditional society. And the reaction of some of the zealots that they had in 1979 in the takeover of the Great Mosque was a reaction to that modernization.
In fact, Juhayman would get his way. After his execution, the Wahhabi establishment pressured the royals to put in place many of the conservative Islamic practices Juhayman had called for.
The consequence of that siege, the government started to be more conservative than it was before. I think the government was trying to absolve themselves, and that we are not anti-religious, we are not anti the religious establishment.
Yeah, the vibe I'm getting here is like the revolution in Iran probably led to some broader sentiment in the Middle East that countries that were westernizing a little too quickly were not organic representations of the will of the people, and that they were selling out the history and the culture and the religion to be cozied up with Western interests that were not really interested in the freedoms of the people, and they were basically selling out national identity for McDonald's and cars and stuff.
They emphasize their religious credentials.
Women announcers were banned from TV. Even Western companies within Saudi Arabia were discouraged from employing women. Movie theaters and music shops were shut down.
There was a reaction. Religious authority in the kingdom promoted stricter practices of Islam, whether it is in prayers, in the performance of religious duties, and social mores. Meaning, for example, women had to be more veiled, if you like, than had previously been practiced.
As Iran had embraced Shia Islam, Saudi Arabia now fully embraced its own fundamentalist Sunni Islam. The double hit that Saudi Arabia took, both the revolution of 1979 and the siege of Mecca, did result in increasing sectarianism coming out of Iran, but also coming from Saudi Arabia. Is that a fair statement?
I think perhaps in some social contexts, but also there were some who saw Khomeini's efforts must be countered by a similar sectarian thrust from Saudi Arabia.
The Saudi government would grant their religious establishment billions more Saudi petrodollars to spread Wahhabism around the world.
They have to double down after 1979 because they have these zealots internally, they have the threat of Iran, so they mobilize.
Yeah, so now it's, and I'm just thinking out loud here, it's kind of been established that religious appeals are very effective at rallying people and mobilizing people, especially when combined with legitimate anti-Western sentiment. And then it becomes a matter of if Iran has a monopoly on the Shia wing of that, then Saudi Arabia thought we have to have some kind of counterbalance to that, where we're not being seen as like the super secular, super pro-West, although they are super pro-West, at least nominally. What's the best way to put this? The idea being that like if the vehicle being used to establish legitimacy is religion, that the flavor of that religion that you're using is kind of just a tool more so than, I mean, at least for the government. The people, I'm sure there's a lot of true believers in this,
They
but
pump a lot of money into religion.
This seems a lot like very cynical stuff, which is all of geopolitics, to be fair.
Both domestically and internationally.
You always wonder sometimes with certain countries, like I wonder a lot with Iran, like how ideologically motivated is the leadership versus like much more like strategically minded and like less married to ideology. Because in the case of Saudi Arabia, it seems like the leadership there is not very married to religious ideology. They're just kind of being pragmatic. Whereas in Iran, it's a little bit harder to tell, especially in this period of time, how much of the leadership was like legitimately ideologically motivated versus being a lot more pragmatic and cynical in the calculations it was making.
In order to boost their legitimacy and in order to ward off and fight the Iranian threat, which was very serious.
And then came an historic opportunity to promote Wahhabi ideas in a country back across the Gulf, a country that had been founded as an Islamic republic, Pakistan. The King Faisal Mosque in Islamabad is the largest mosque in Pakistan and among the largest in the world. Evoking a Bedouin tent, it's named after Saudi King Faisal because he funded it.
Architecture goes crazy. I have to say, it's not talked about enough. I see a lot of people talking about cathedrals and all these things which are sick, but Islamic architecture goes so hard. This is crazy.
The King Faisal Mosque is a very powerful symbol. It was built at the height of the relationship between the Pakistanis and the Saudis. Khomeini's revolution was a religious revolution in favor of Shiaism. And that really prompted the Saudis then to spend so much money around the Sunni world to build up support for Saudi Arabia and support for Wahhabism.
Since the 1960s, the Saudis have funneled over $100 billion into funding mosques and religious schools all over the world. 60 years ago, there were 244 madrasas in Pakistan. Today, there are 24,000. Many of them are still teaching conservative Wahhabi doctrines. A majority Sunni country with a large Shia population, Pakistan has become increasingly sectarian over the years.
You know, when I was a young boy, I didn't know who was a Shia in my class or who was a Sunni. It didn't matter. It was not an issue. But after the Iranian Revolution and after the Saudi money pouring in here, split between the Shia and the Sunni. It is after that, 79, that this became a major issue in Pakistan.
Of course, the Saudis, they wanted to stop Iranian influence. And Pakistan became the junior partner. But I think for the Saudis, the great opportunity was the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan.
ABC News has learned that a massive buildup of Soviet troops is taking place in Afghanistan, leading some intelligence analysts to conclude that a Soviet invasion is underway.
In the same year, as the Saudis were confronted with the Iranian Revolution and the siege of Mecca, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. The Saudis seized the opportunity to defend their Muslim brethren against the godless communists and to gain regional influence. They found a perfect partner in Pakistan's president, Zia al-Haq.
President Zia al-Haq is very much the man in charge of Pakistan these days. He rules the country with his own particular style.
Zia had come to power in a coup and begun a campaign to Islamicize every aspect of Pakistani society.
When Pakistan was founded, equal rights for women were enshrined in the constitution. Women were accepted in many professions. Under General Zia's martial law regime, the orthodox Muslim view is gaining ground, that a woman should be completely covered and veiled.
We'd never had such a transformative military dictator who wanted to change the whole British inherited colonial system of state institutions, the legal system, the constitution, and change it all towards an Islamic system. Zia introduced Sharia courts and set up a parallel Islamic system of punishment.
There are public floggings in Pakistan, and the authorities put microphones around the necks of those being flogged so their screams could be amplified to the crowds watching the flogging.
Damn.
We started out with an open hand of love and affection for the people of Pakistan. But then I find that at times the speed has to be applied. So now
all this Zia carried out with his own agenda, but which was very lavishly funded by the Saudis.
Funded by the Saudis with the support of the United States.
In addition, we are deeply grateful for President Zia's visit. He's a military man who received...
Isn't this kind of like the formation of like a lot of these groups like the Taliban and Al-Qaeda where America was giving money to Pakistan and then they were just telling them, hey, we want you guys to fund some groups that are going to fight back against the Soviets. And then the ISI started funneling the money towards more ideological groups because they felt they were easier to control. But then when the Cold War ended, now you have a bunch of ideologues with weapons running around, I guess.
Training in our country. He's familiar with our nation. His knowledge of the sensitivities and ideals of America make him particularly dear to us.
Beyond his expression of friendship, President Carter pledged to defend Pakistan and Saudi Arabia against Soviet expansion into the Gulf with its oil.
Our position be absolutely clear.
It became known as the Carter Doctrine.
An attempt by any outside force to gain control of the Persian Gulf region will be regarded as an assault on the vital interests of the United States of America.
The United States wanted Pakistan and the region to become a bastion against communism. And in order to become a bastion, they thought that these religious forces were the best to act as some sort of a great break against the expansion of communist forces. And that resulted in creating a monster in Pakistan and in the region.
President Carter approved a covert operation in which the U.S. and Saudis would jointly fund the Afghan Mujahideens.
And it was Pakistan and its intelligence service, ISI, that identified the
Turns
Afghan
out
rebel
when
group.
you fund random militant groups for geopolitical strategic reasons and then you quote-unquote win and then you just dip, those groups don't just stop existing or having goals and beliefs.
that they
Shocking.
wanted most to support. And so Pakistan really affiliated itself with some of the networks that regarded Shiism as heresy.
So basically the Americans outsourced the selection of who to back to the ISI, to the Secret Service of Pakistan. And they chose the most radical elements of the jihadists.
That's right. Partly because Pakistan chose the most radical elements among the jihadists because it saw that radicalism as a potential instrument of control in post-Soviet Afghanistan. If they won the war,
That is smart, but it's also
groups
risky.
that would be loyal to them.
I understand the strategic thinking,
heaviest
but
offensive of the war against the Afghan rebels. Rebel commanders are reporting that the units were taking major losses.
The war dragged on for years. Following Carter, President Reagan celebrated the efforts of the Afghan
didn't realize Carter was such a hawk. Yeah, I was gonna say, but this is like, I feel like in the Cold War era, everyone was a hawk. There was no period during the Cold War where America was like, okay, we're gonna stop doing proxy wars. We're just gonna
dramatically
leave.
increased their support.
You are not alone, freedom fighters. America will support you with moral and material assistance. Your right not just to fight and die for freedom, but to fight and win freedom.
Intelligence sources have told NBC News that the administration is now sending secretly more than $600 million worth of military supplies to the resistance fighters in Afghanistan.
Now we know, of course, that every
Is
billion that
Dan
the
in
Americans
chat?
are giving to the Afghan Mujahideen to fight the
Why am I not
Soviets, the
seeing
Saudis
him?
were matching that.
And the Saudis did even more. The Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia had decreed the war a jihad and encouraged
he
thousands
joined.
of Saudis to become holy warriors. One of the first to go to Pakistan and join the Afghan cause was this man.
When bin Laden came to Pakistan, his first job, which was given to him by Pakistan intelligence, was actually to create ammunition dumps and arms dumps on the Pakistan-Afghan border, but just inside Afghanistan. And he dug out these caves, which eventually became, of course, the famous caves of Tora Bora, where he escaped to after the Americans bombed him and invaded Afghanistan.
The last major convoy of Soviet troops from Kabul has crossed the border from Afghanistan into the Soviet Union on its way home. The last Soviet
By 1989, after 10 years of fighting, the Mujahideen had succeeded.
13,000 Soviet soldiers killed, and the Afghan guerrillas stronger today than when it all started.
The moment the war ended, the Americans handed over Afghan policy to the Pakistanis and the Saudis, and literally told them, I mean, we're out of here now, you do what you will. You do what you want.
What?
And what we had then was
I
Pakistani
guess-
Saudi joint support for bringing in extremist Afghan Mujahideen into
This
power.
is why foreign policy is so complicated, bro. I just like, on the one hand, it's like, yeah, you don't maybe want the U.S. to stick around and keep influencing things, but the reason the U.S. was leaving was not some kind of altruistic, we believe in the right of peoples to have self-determination. It was more of just like, okay, we got our W. We don't want to have to deal with this anymore, so y'all can just figure that shit out.
And of course, everything stems from there. If you see the growth of Al-Qaeda and the acts of terrorism against the West, it all stems from this original cardinal sin, whereby jihad is elevated and is then supported at a global level by everyone.
Many of the jihadists trained for the Afghan war would mature into the jihadists of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, encouraged by Saudi Wahhabi teachings. Why was it that this extremism came from your schools and from your mosques?
It was the provocation of the Iranian Revolution, created a reaction in the Sunni world that then translated into extremism and violence on our streets.
So you blame the Iranians?
In part, yes. And in part, I blame ourselves also in hindsight. Because are there things that we could have done? Probably. But at the time that this was all, all these forces were being unleashed, you deal with them at the time. 30 years later, you can go back and say, could things have been done differently? Of course.
That's an important reflection on your part, I think. I think a lot of Americans feel that they never hear that from the Saudis.
But that's the reality. That's the nature of life. You learn as you go.
Yeah. I get.
While the Saudis
yeah,
supported
I guess,
jihad in
like,
Afghanistan, Iran took sides in another regional
you should
war.
still be able to criticize decisions after they're made. I mean, there is some
Across the
extent to
Middle
which, yeah,
East.
hindsight is 20/20, but like, and I obviously want to read more about this. What exactly is the logic of radicalizing a bunch of people and then giving them weapons and just assuming that things are going to be hunky-dory after that?
West of Iraq and Syria.
I'm sure
and
there was a
bordering
very
Israel
airtight
is
reasoning
Lebanon.
for this. I don't know.
I drove south into Lebanon's Shia heartland and the town of Nabatea. Lebanon has had a large Shia minority for hundreds of years.
There's been a linkage
Victory
between the Lebanese
glorified
Shia and Iran
jihad,
that goes
yeah,
back
that makes
centuries.
sense.
So there are family connections that continue to persist. There's been a linkage between the Lebanese Shia and Iran that goes back centuries. So there are family connections that continue to persist. The followers of Khomeini going back to the 1960s have been there.
The Shia had been a poor and disenfranchised group compared to Lebanon's Christians and Sunnis.
Shia was a marginalized group in that society. Population-wise, they were big enough, but their share of power was not that much. So the Iranian Revolution really was a turning point in a type of identity revival. And then, of course, many other issues came, including the Israeli aggression.
The Middle East appears dangerously close to all-out war tonight, with thousands of Israeli troops deep inside Lebanon.
In June 1982, Israel invaded and occupied southern Lebanon in order to drive out the Palestine Liberation Organization, which had been shelling Israel from here. The residents of Nabatea remember those days.
What do you remember of the time during the Israeli occupation?
فاتوا بال 1982 وصار ايام الفلسطينيه وصار في قصف قبل 4 ايام قصف وبعدين اجتاحوا وهربوا الفلسطينيين وبعدين بعد فتره ضلوا الاسرائيليين وصار في مقاومه.
Within weeks of their invasion, Israel had advanced on Beirut.
Israeli warplanes pounded the area around the headquarters of the PLO in central Beirut today, leaving scores of people dead and wounded.
Reached an all-time low if it was prepared to stand by and see an Arab capital taken by the Israelis.
Seizing an opportunity, Khomeini immediately sent around 1,500 Islamic Revolutionary Guards to Lebanon.
ولی امام عاقل ما گفت که شما نمیتونید با این فاصله برید اونجا با اسرائیل بجنگید. ملت لبنان رو آماده کنید که با دشمنی که خاکشون رو اشغال کرده بجنگه.
Mohsen Rafik, one of the founders of the IRGC, made more than 30 trips to Lebanon.
ما دوست داشتیم لبنان از اشغال آمریکا و سعودی و اسرائیل آزاد بشه. لذا مردم لبنان رو
Make
آموزش
sure you are
دادیم.
double tapping the screen, following, joining the Discord.
The IRGC, which had started as Khomeini's private militia, was always meant to spread Iran's influence throughout the Islamic world. Now they began recruiting Shia fighters from other local militias.
We had Iranian Revolutionary Guards coming into Lebanon, and they were very much the impetus to get things going. This was a very small, nascent organization back then. They would inspire the Shia population there living in these little hill villages to embrace the cause of Iran, and they marshaled them into military units. They gave them basic training and some weaponry as well. And gradually the ideology of Hezbollah spread from the Bekaa to the Shia areas of southern Beirut.
So many bangers in this documentary. I just mean melodically, by the way. I'm not endorsing
Well, I
any
think
of
they
these
recognized,
messages.
first of all, there's the obvious ideological struggle against Israel, and there was an opportunity to be had.
Hezbollah, the party of God, the most fanatical of Lebanon's Shiite Muslims, are now firmly, openly, and successfully
Muslims.
established in Beirut. Day by day, their following grows.
When exactly Hezbollah was formally established is still contested. But a turning point for the group came by accident in 1983 during the Ashura festival in Nabatea. Ashura in Nabatea is particularly dramatic. The Shia faithful cut and beat. But on this day, an Israeli military convoy lost its way and drove into the crowd. People began throwing rocks. The Israeli soldiers fired back.
What does he mean they lost their way? What?
Bloody to honor the
Oh my
death
God.
an Israeli military convoy lost its way and drove into the crowd. People began throwing rocks. The Israeli soldiers fired back. At least 2 people were killed and many injured. Tensions had been escalating for months.
This just in from Beirut. At least 40 U.S. Marines and 10 French soldiers are dead after 2 explosions.
A week later, there was an attack on Israel's allies, France and the United States.
A truck filled with explosives crashed through the gate.
A suicide bomber driving a truck loaded with TNT blew up the barracks of U.S. Marines who had been stationed as peacekeepers.
Later, the same happened here at a French military.
At almost the same time, another suicide driver crashed into the French barracks a few miles away.
In Lebanon, the death toll has been steadily climbing all day. 125, 135.
241 U.S. Marines and 58 French paratroopers
The
died.
explosion was the worst attack on the Marines.
The era of suicide bombings had begun.
Before this explosion, 6 Marines had been killed by sniper fire.
The attacks were widely attributed to Hezbollah, acting under Iranian direction. And they continued.
The latest attack brings to more than 100 the number of people killed in bombings in Lebanon this year.
The attack seemed to be working. Hezbollah won new followers.
More and more fundamentalist Shiite Muslims are volunteering to blow themselves up.
I'm really trying to skip the stuff that's probably not allowed to be shown. I'm trying my best.
The U.S. pulled out and Israel was forced to retreat. Israel would eventually withdraw all its troops from Lebanon.
Never before had we seen an Israeli withdraw from occupied Arab territory. So that was basically the big turning point, the image of Hezbollah as a successful force, which achieved what other Arab militaries were not able to achieve.
Hezbollah marks their victories every year in a celebration they call Liberation and Resistance Day. Hezbollah's security would not allow us to bring our own camera crew, so they assigned us one of their own. Hezbollah has grown into a major political party with a powerful militia. Designated a terrorist organization by the U.S., Hezbollah is widely seen as controlled by Iran. But Hashim Safiuddin, one of the party's highest-ranking officials, disagrees.
هذه موضة خاطئة. ولدنا وعشنا في لبنان ونحن قدمنا تضحيات من أجل بلدنا لندفع الاحتلال عن بلدنا، لكن نعم نعترف لإيران بأنها دعمتنا وساعدتنا من أجل أن نكون أقوياء في بلدنا دفاعا عن بلدنا وليس دفاعا عن إيران.
The connection between Hezbollah and Iran is hard to deny. Hezbollah's name, the Party of God.
Gifting suspended for 10 minutes. This behavior is not in line with our policies. Gifting is suspended for 10 minutes in this live. Reason, limited interaction. What does that even mean? Gifting suspended for limit. Okay, I don't know. What is the interaction? Thank you all for the gifts. Thank you for the heart me's. And the roses. Thank you.
Was given by Ayatollah Khomeini.
Do I have to do the ice cream so yummy? Smell the rose? I'm not doing that shit.
Its emblem is modeled on the IRGCs, and they hold allegiance to the current supreme leader.
If you want to gift me my Cash App, my PayPal, and the link tree in my bio.
The ideology comes very much from Iran.
Dan got that last night.
Damn. About the very intensive
Deep State's
religious
cracking
lessons
down.
that they undergo. Even after they become full-fledged fighters, they're still learning about Islam and about the Vilayat al-Faqih and all this kind of thing.
Vilayat al-Faqih, guardianship of the jurist, Khomeini's core doctrine that gave him ultimate religious and political authority.
Vilayat al-Faqih, this is really the backbone of Hezbollah that binds all its constituent parts together. They have to subscribe to the central ideological pillar.
With Iranian funding, training, arms, and exported ideology, Iran turned Hezbollah into a powerful militia that serves Iran's interests. For security, Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, almost always speaks from an undisclosed location. Was it as clear at the
They
time?
killed this guy last year, right?
Was it as clear at the time that this was to be a major Iranian project?
I don't think the Iranians necessarily planned that, in 35 years, by 2017, we will have turned Hezbollah into this massive military machine that is even stronger than the Lebanese army, that Israel has called for the first time in January this year, its greatest threat. Today, my guesstimate on their strength is a standing army of 20,000 fully trained fighters.
And it's a force that projects outside of the borders of Lebanon.
And it's now a force that projects outside. And it allows Iran to project its influence across the region.
One can't fully understand Iran and the bitter divides in the region today without looking back to the 1980s and the Iran-Iraq War.
Man, how different, genuine question, how different would the world be today if we never invaded Iraq? I feel like that shifted the dynamics so much in that region.
Each year, Iran rolls out a huge military parade to commemorate the 8-year-long conflict.
Damn, Rebecca just fact-checked the documentary.
Each year, Iran rolls out a huge military parade to commemorate the 8-year-long conflict. They see it as an each year.
The forgotten war. Well, she vaguely remembers it, so not that forgotten. Get wrecked, liberals.
Each year, Iran rolls out a huge military parade to commemorate the 8-year-long conflict. They see it as instrumental in shaping their foreign policy stance today.
This event is also an opportunity for Iran to show off its military power.
Here is where they parade their latest long-range missiles.
In uniting to keep out foreign invaders.
We are required to produce our own means of defense because the United States conducts a campaign of preventing Iran from acquiring its means of defense. That campaign started during the Iran-Iraq War. So we have to do our own defense.
I don't think it's a war that Americans understand very well. Your generation that now leads Iran, you were all shaped by that experience.
But it's a very unfortunate fact that people have short memories. And actually, some of them may not want to remember what happened.
Iraq declared today that its fighting with Iran is now a full-scale war. Twice today, Iraqi warplanes bombed Iranian air bases. Iran retaliated with heavy damage to both sides.
In the year following
I just want
Khomeini's
to pause
revolution,
to say,
Saddam Hussein...
we all really take for granted that we have lived in general peacetime in the United States in the 21st century, especially if you're like me and you were born in the 2000s. Not to say we don't have political issues to complain about, especially now, holy shit, but like things can get really scary and really bad and really unstable and really violent. Not too long ago, we act like, we live in this, these dangerous, high-intensity times, but we have to keep scale in mind here. Not that we should just take for granted, or that we should not fight hard to make society better, but we've come a long way. I mean, and obviously it's different in the Middle East versus like the U.S., but like think about people who lived in the U.S. during World War I or II or the Civil War. Like the fact that mass violence is not a part of our day-to-day life, just going out and about, is something that I hope we're not gonna say, we didn't appreciate it when we had it. I hope we never get to a point where that becomes commonplace, but it feels like we're trending towards a breakdown of the institutional stability that's required to maintain that level of peace.
Attacked Iran. He sensed an opportunity to both capture territory and possibly topple the regime before it became a threat.
Are they interested in knocking off, toppling the Khomeini regime?
Absolutely. They'd like to see Khomeini gone and a moderate regime in there.
This was a shock and awe operation almost. Everybody expected the Iranian government to fall within 7 days.
Under Khomeini, Iran's armed forces are a pale shadow of their former selves. The best officers have been purged, shot, or escaped.
Iran's military was woefully unprepared. Without money or allies, Iran focused on building up their ground troops.
The same way that the revolution succeeded, Imam Khomeini brought people by millions to the war against this aggression.
Ayatollah Khomeini told his people that Iran's troops were equipped with divine power. Many of those encouraged to sign up were just boys.
Did I zone out? Did they explain why Iraq attacked Iran? Maybe I wasn't paying attention for that part, or was that not explained in the documentary?
How old is this guy? What's it, 14 or something? Because he's come here to fight. He's left his mother, he's left his father, just to fight the Iraqis.
Boys as young as 12 were sent into battle with keys to wear around their necks.
Jesus.
Keys they were told that as Shia martyrs would get them into heaven. Poorly trained and barely armed, these young soldiers were meant to clear the way for the more experienced regular troops.
This is really
what
fucked
became
up.
known as human wave attacks.
And it's throughout history, even more recent history. Child soldiers, this is gross shit.
Young boys aged 10 and upwards sent in human waves by the Iranians against the Iraqis. They're told of the glory of martyrdom. God will make them invisible to their enemies.
Mohammed, good to meet you. Thank you.
One of the few reporters to witness these human wave attacks was Mohammed Salam, who had been reporting for the Associated Press.
Thank you.
I found him at his home in Beirut.
Did you see these waves of children?
Oh, yes. Oh, my God. They gave their little children, the children soldiers, 12, 13 years old, these keys to heaven. I mean, that's something that made me cry. I mean, usually the group was a group of children with an elder guy who had a amama, a religious, who was the leader. They go through these minefields. Then they go through the Iraqi fortifications that were actually protected by a network of napalm mines. Then they enter Iraq, and during all this process, they were under shelling. They were being blown up, earth up, sky down. They were being bombed by helicopters, by warplanes, by howitzers, by rocket launchers, and stepping on mines, and they kept coming. They kept coming, they kept coming. They were actually like sea waves. And there were more humans than bullets. They were stepping on their colleagues' bodies.
These human wave attacks turned out to be extremely successful. Iran learned that by sheer force of numbers, they could compete against Iraq's superior military power. Over the course of the war, hundreds of thousands of Iranian boys would be sent to the front lines. By spring of 1982, Iran succeeded in pushing Iraq back.
The Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein announced a voluntary withdrawal from all captured territory.
Iran was then faced with the decision to either accept a ceasefire or advance into Iraqi territory.
The Iranians are showing signs of resistance to the Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein announced a voluntary withdrawal from all captured territory.
Iran was then faced with the decision to either accept a ceasefire or advance into Iraqi territory.
The Iranians are showing signs of resistance to the very idea of a ceasefire.
Khomeini chose war. He declared that Iran would not be satisfied until Saddam Hussein was toppled. Taking the holy city of Karbala in Iraq, that became the battle cry for Iranian troops. Karbala is where in the 7th century the revered Imam Hussein was martyred. It's an event depicted in Iranian films.
So Imam Hussein is the Prophet Muhammad's grandson. He claimed to be the successor to the Prophet. And there was a very famous battle that took place in Karbala between him and a Sunni army. The army surrounded him and his supporters. Many of his supporters abandoned him, and he was brutally murdered by this Sunni army. His murder, his abandonment by his followers, has become a great tragic tale for the Shia community. For most of Shia history, that story, the story of Hussein, was one of admitting defeat, of accepting your fate as having to live under unjust circumstances. What Ayatollah Khomeini did was that he reinterpreted the story. It became a source for activist politics, for Shias to not accept their permanent fate, having to live in an unjust state, but rather one in which they could take matters into their hands and try to change the world.
A dawn raid by Iranian jets.
Fighting on a massive scale is continuing this morning along the Iraq-Iran.
With Khomeini's push into Iraq, the war entered a dangerous new phase.
This seems like bro got a little too high on his own supply, that they were like, you know what, Iraq had the superior military on paper, but we pushed them out. Let's just keep going. Now let's give them a taste of their own medicine and take Iraq, which I don't know how strategically smart that is.
The fight now became involved.
I guess we'll find out.
When Khomeini began attacking Iraq and declaring publicly that his aim was to topple Saddam and liberate Baghdad, that's when Saudi Arabia and the other GCC countries decided to support Saddam Hussein, along with European and American countries as well.
Donations running into millions from countries like Saudi Arabia enable Saddam Hussein to buy the arms to keep the war going.
We supported Saddam Hussein because Saddam Hussein was an ally. It was a war between Iran and Iraq. Iraq is an Arab country. We have defense agreements within the Arab League, and so we supported Iraq. Iran at the time publicly called for the overthrow of the Saudi government.
They want to export the revolution. They want to topple the monarchies. They want to send their militias. Of course the Saudis would support Iraq.
Iran buys weapons around the world. Countries include France, West Germany, Russia, Jordan, and China, and many more.
We were up against a regime that was receiving equipment from almost everybody. The Americans provided it with AWACS intelligence. The French provided it with Mirage fighters. The Russians provided it with MiG fighters.
And the Saudis?
The Saudis provided it with all the money they need.
The Ayatollah Khomeini has called on the Iraqi army to desert and overthrow Iraq's president, Saddam Hussein.
Khomeini had hoped Iraq's Shia, a majority of the population, would support Iran. But as Iraqis, they opposed Khomeini's invasion of their country.
Interesting.
When the revolution happened in Iran,
he said Shia majority in Iraq?
A majority of the population would support Iran. But as Iraqis, they opposed Khomeini's invasion of their country.
When the revolution happened in Iran, a lot of Arabs sympathized with the revolution for various reasons.
Sunnis as well as Shias.
Sunnis as well as Shias. But once Iran started a war machine and started trying to export the revolution, then people started to realize gradually that this is really a sectarian way to dominate.
War has become a way of life for both sides, as has hating each other.
This bloody war, which has cost 200,000 lives.
Saddam Hussein, now fully emboldened by his Arab and Western allies, did not hold back.
Iraq says it will use any means at its disposal to vanquish the Iranians.
Saddam Hussein was not a joke. That was a regime. A real, tough, cruel regime. I mean, you cannot...
Mohammed Salam was in Iran with Iraqi troops after one notably brutal battle.
After the battles, I went into the battlefield. And I found something strange. I found thousands and thousands of Iranian soldiers in trenches, holding their AKs and dead. Couldn't understand what happened. They had no bullet wounds. They had nothing.
Oh,
they
chemical
simply
weapons.
had blood on their noses and mouth, and they had urinated in their clothes. And we started counting and counting and counting. It was a full day counting bodies, lines of bodies, like the photos of World War I. in trenches. But obviously it was the first evidence I saw of the effect of chemical weapons.
So you reported this?
Yes.
There was no outrage?
No, nothing. No, nothing. No, nothing.
In the Arab press, there was no outrage?
Oh. Iraq came out victorious, period.
That chemical attack was one of the first of a series launched by Saddam Hussein. Recently declassified CIA documents have revealed that the Reagan administration knew about Saddam Hussein's use of chemical weapons, and they suspected he might get away with it. At least once, the CIA gave Hussein the intelligence he needed to target Iranian combat units, despite knowing he could again use chemical weapons.
These dead Iranian soldiers lie where they fell, but they do not bear the mutilations and obvious signs of artillery or small arms fire, a possible indication that
crimes because they gave. These were crimes against humanity. American officials should be imprisoned for these crimes because they gave Saddam Hussein the technology. I was a victim of chemical attacks personally, and I survived 2 attacks. Where was the outrage? There was no outrage.
In the Persian Gulf today, both Iran and Iraq have staged new attacks against each other, while diplomatic efforts intensify in an effort to bring about a ceasefire.
Finally, in 1988, 8 years after it began, with the war at a stalemate, Khomeini agreed to a ceasefire.
Iran-Iraq war, yeah, we're watching a documentary on just the history of Iran and Saudi Arabia and like the broader context of their proxy war in the Middle East. I think this is a 2-part documentary, yeah. On part 1 right now.
As many as 1 million people had died.
And has cost more lives than any conflict since World War II.
Both Iran and Iraq's countries and economies had been devastated.
Into a nightmare. Losses enormous.
Iran had been internationally isolated by the war, but 6 years before, Iran could have stopped it.
You had a chance to bring that war to an end in 1982, and yet you made decisions at the top of the government to continue the war.
No. It wasn't. It was important that they confess. Our condition was that, no, we do not stop the war unless you confess that Saddam Hussein started this war.
Was it a mistake to reject the ceasefire?
No. In 1988, we had a resolution 598, which addressed Iran's major demand, that Iraq was responsible to initiate this war. That was very important for us.
But a lot of lives were lost in the interim.
It's the unfortunate situation.
For that principle.
That's the question that the Iranian people need to ask the international community. Why didn't anybody in the international community say a word about the Iraqi use of chemical weapons? I believe the international community owes Iran an explanation for its disastrous behavior. Iran doesn't owe anybody any explanation for defending itself.
From Iran came a statement purportedly from the Ayatollah Khomeini, who admitted that changing his position and agreeing to a ceasefire was like taking poison. He indicated that he only did it because things had become so desperate in Iran that the survival of the revolution depended upon it.
I think more than any other historic event, it's been the Iraq War, which has really shaped the worldview and attitudes of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And it's notable when you look at the last will and testament of Ayatollah Khomeini. He reserves the most amount of hatred, not towards America, not towards Israel, but towards Saudi Arabia. And I think it was really as a result of Saudi Arabia's support for Saddam Hussein.
Khomeini's mausoleum is just south of Tehran.
That is not me in the chat. I want to clarify that.
After accepting the ceasefire, his son wrote that the Ayatollah never again spoke in public. A year later, he died. But for Iranians, the survival of the revolution was its own victory.
And the fact that they didn't win that war, but they didn't lose that war, was a testament to them of their resolve and of the strength of their ideology, of the strength of their faith, that they could basically fight the entire world. They could fight the United States, they could fight Iraq, they could fight chemical weapons, they could fight Saudi Arabia, and do it all with not having to capitulate on their ideals, on their beliefs, or even on their geographical integrity.
"14 years later, Iran would have another chance to extend its power into Iraq, this time thanks to the United States.
Nice.
This was once upon a time the Fertile Crescent. Saddam's turned it into a desert.
I came to Iraq for the first time in 2003, right after the fall of Saddam. I was with the Iraqi writer and activist Kanan Makia, who for more than a decade had been at the center of efforts to topple Saddam. He hadn't seen Baghdad since he was 19.
How do you feel coming back here? I feel that the size of the task is overwhelming, facing reconstruction of this country.
I was with you in 2003.
Yeah.
Just as the American soldiers had taken down Saddam, we followed on their heels, drove up from Kuwait. You favored that invasion.
I did. For me, that kind of a regime was an abomination that I was prepared to say, and I still think is true, the country had no future whatsoever until that abomination was eliminated.
This is a slippery slope argument to make, though. I don't know, that you can just start overriding the sovereignty of other nations if they have authoritarian governments. Like, obviously you want to try to put pressure, but like there's a very delicate balance.
For years, Makia had been watching as Saddam's Sunni Arab regime had suppressed all opposition,
What's the name of this documentary? Bitter Rivals, Iran and Saudi Arabia, Part 1.
including the
PBS
majority
Frontline.
Shia population, with threats, expulsions, and a routine brutality. For years, Makia had been watching as Saddam's Sunni Arab regime had suppressed all opposition, including the majority Shia population, with threats, expulsions, and a routine brutality.
I see a common theme throughout this documentary of governments taking advantage of legitimate grievances of people to launder what are just power grabs. It seems like that's the common theme of all geopolitics ever, is that people have legitimate grievances and then governments are like, we're going to take advantage of that to gin up support for what's actually just nothing having to do with your interests, just us expanding our influence for whatever reason it may be.
We say he who collaborates with a foreign party is sentenced
And it's
to death.
fucked up because, like, I'm sure there's people in Iraq who were like, yeah, Saddam had to go, he did this and that to my family, which is like a very legitimate thing, but then it's like, okay, he's now being removed for not exactly altruistic humanitarian reasons. That's authoritarianism 101. And beyond that, it seems like it's just geopolitics 101.
Back in 1991, the Shia had risen up against Saddam. The U.S. had just driven Saddam's army out of Kuwait.
Which I get. I mean, it's probably unrealistic to say that nation states are going to engage with each other in good faith in the genuine interest of their people while trying to respect the sovereignty of other nations. I guess it seems like is geopolitics a zero-sum game? I think that's probably hotly debated.
Dictator in Baghdad.
The President George Bush Sr. had decided it would be unwise to take out Saddam. He encouraged Iraqis to do it themselves.
And the Iraqi people to take matters into their own hands and force Saddam Hussein, the dictator, to step aside.
He should have pulled out, just saying.
The Shia believed the U.S. would come to their aid. They were wrong.
Wait, what?
And force Saddam Hussein, the dictator, to step aside.
The Shia believed the U.S. would come to their aid.
Nice.
They were wrong. Saddam came after them with extreme violence.
No, because trade, yeah, economically it's not a zero-sum game, but there's so many more aspects to geopolitics than just trade. There's like obviously territory and spheres of influence and cultural power and a million other things.
We used to calculate the casualties of the 1991 uprising, 40 to 60.
Fuck, bro.
The regime did something for the first time that it hadn't done before. It attacks Shiites as Shiites.
Saddam held on to power, but Makia and other Iraqi exiles continued to press the U.S. to help remove him.
I said this at the time, the chances of something dramatically better than Saddam was a very small chance. I personally felt morally obligated to struggle for that 5%, 10% chance that the transition from Saddam to something better might be possible.
It's a big gamble, buddy.
And then came 9/11 and its consequences.
The war on terror is not confined strictly to the Al-Qaeda that we're chasing. The war on terror.
Another example of legitimate grievance being used to justify power grabs and geopolitical strategizing.
This President Bush would do what his father had not.
The history of Saddam Hussein.
Saudi Arabia has publicly opposed U.S. military action against Iraq and says the U.S. won't be allowed to use Saudi air bases for
The Bush administration sent Vice President Dick Cheney to Saudi Arabia to get their support for an invasion. But Crown Prince Abdullah warned against it.
for a change in the Saudi stance.
Abdullah in particular felt that we were actively working against Saudi national security interests.
To destabilize the neighborhood and allow for Iran to move in.
Yeah, and not to heed Saudi counsel, which was don't do this.
We do not want people to rush into something that could have disastrous consequences. Do you know what will happen the day after?
Saudi Arabia knew that if you smashed the state in Iraq, you would open up a Pandora's box. They just knew it, that Iraq would implode. And then it would offer an opportunity to the Iranians to take it over, which is exactly what happened.
But U.S.-Saudi relations were tense. 15 of the 19 hijackers in the 9/11 attacks were Saudis.
The relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia at that point was so poisoned by 9/11. There was really very little willingness on the American side to heed this advice. They felt that the Saudis, while maybe not directly complicit in 9/11, were indirectly complicit, but the momentum for the invasion out of the Pentagon and elsewhere, as we well know, was unstoppable.
This was central Baghdad today, as Saddam Hussein's regime finally lost control.
The statue of Saddam Hussein is still hanging on the pedestal, but as it collapsed, a great roar came up from the cloud. There it goes. It is falling down to the ground. It is come apart. The crowd is going mad, rushing towards it. They've been pelting it with stones.
Taking Baghdad took just 3 weeks. But the Bush administration failed to anticipate what would come next.
There was a complete failure to understand the Sunni-Shia equation that existed in Iraq at that time. I think the Americans have never really understood, even as late as after 9/11, when there should have been much greater understanding of the Muslim world, the depth of the antagonism between Shiaism and Sunnism.
With Saddam suddenly gone, the fervor and strength of the Shia population was on view for the first time. Just days after Baghdad was taken, Shia poured into the streets to begin one of their holiest pilgrimages, the Arba'in. It commemorates the 40th day after Imam Hussein's death. An estimated 2 million pilgrims turned out. Shia themselves were surprised at their numbers.
The Shia power came as a wave. No one was expecting there is this majority here in the country. We didn't know there had been Arab Shias. We thought Shiaism is Iranism. And then we recognized that we have Shiism in Iraq. So the fall of Saddam Hussein really exposed the whole situation. This made it a direct fight between Shiism and Sunnism.
Leading the pilgrims that day was an Ayatollah just back from years of exile in Iran. He and other returning exiles were eager to remake Iraq into another Shia Islamist state.
Basically, very early on, you have Shia political groups that become very important in Shia politics after Saddam Hussein. Groups that had just spent the last 20 years learning Persian, becoming very close friends with Iranian leaders, with leaders of the IRGC, and trusting them as much as they trusted any government.
What the 2003 invasion did was give Iran an opportunity that it could never have dreamt of having, which was to bring Shiites into power in Iraq who were beholden to the Iranian state.
The Americans did you a favor. They took out Saddam Hussein.
Yes, you are right. They did us a favor. More than that.
In Tehran, they were elated.
To take Saddam Hussein that we wanted to do. So you were sacrificing your own soldiers for our aim.
The American role in Iraq is just a puzzle, I think, for me, and I think
in Saudi Arabia, they were dumbfounded.
Why would the American hand the government to the allies of Iran? Iran is considered a sponsor of terrorism by the Americans.
And those who were on high before, in particular the Baathists, who used their power to repress the Iraqi people, will be removed from office.
Then, American envoy Paul Bremer handed Iran another gift.
Shortly, I will issue an order on measures to extirpate Baathist and Baathism from Iraq forever.
30 to 40,000 members of Saddam's Baathist party, most of them Sunnis, were banned from holding any public office, and the Iraqi army was dissolved. Protests broke out immediately. Moderate Shia leaders had warned the U.S. against de-Baathification.
I consider what happened as a very wrong mistake, and it's going to be disastrous for the country.
هذه المجازات تضحيتنا، هذه التضحية التي قدمناها من أجل البلد، هذه رفض العراق، من أجل كرامة العراق وهيبة العراق، هذه جازيني مستر برايمر بحل الجيش بدون حقوق.
فجأة السنة حسوا في لحظة تاريخية ما أنهم فقدوا السلطة، ومع فقدان السلطة بدأت المقاومة. هنا اختلطت المقاومة للمحتل والبحث عن السلطة.
The way it was applied, it became an instrument to intimidate people, even people not Baathist. It became really a way to push people out.
Violence followed Bremer's orders. First, a car bomb detonated outside the Jordanian embassy, killing 18 people.
Oh my God.
This one was on local Sunni extremists. Their leader was a Jordanian who had been trained in the Mujahideen camps of Afghanistan, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Later, he would tell Osama bin Laden that he aimed to begin a sectarian war.
Wait, I feel like there was important context for that, though. Hold on. Or just on the TikTok side. I'm going to turn the screen share on so I can hear what they said here.
Killing 18 people. 12 days later, a second attack.
Applied, it became an instrument to intimidate people, even people not Baathists. It became really a way to push people out.
Violence followed Bremer's orders. First, a car bomb detonated outside the Jordanian embassy, killing 18 people. 12 days later, a second attack. This one was on the UN headquarters.
The attack was similar to last week's bombing of the Jordanian embassy in Baghdad.
The attacks had been planned by radical Sunni extremists. Their leader was a Jordanian who had been trained in the Mujahideen camps of Afghanistan, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Later, he would tell Osama bin Laden that he aimed to begin a sectarian war. 10 days after the UN attack, A massive bomb exploded outside the holy Shia shrine of Imam Ali in Najaf, just after Friday prayers. More than 100 people were killed. Embittered Sunnis and officers once part of Saddam's regime now join Zarqawi's
We
cause.
saw Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, and we're seeing a proliferation of these groups, like-minded ones, springing up and joining the cause.
For the officers who served during Saddam regime, I cut his salary and I put him in the street. What do you expect from him? Of course, he will fight. He will join all the military groups who try to destabilize the country because he lost all of his rights.
These guys are spreading and growing. They have hundreds, if not thousands, of new Iraqi recruits.
There was a sense in the
Who cut the holes in these masks? Bro looked goofy as hell.
Growing. They have
They did him dirty. Bro, what is this?
hundreds, if not thousands, of new Iraqi recruits.
there was a sense in the region that Sunnis had lost.
Is that SD kid? Holy
Thousands
shit.
of new Iraqi recruits.
There was a sense in the region
Tell me this doesn't look like SD kid. That's
that
crazy.
Sunnis had lost, and that Iran was on the rise because suddenly Shias had more power in Iraq. Sunnis, in principle, should not feel like they are helpless. They represent 80% of Muslims in the region, and yet many of them are feeling wronged, and it's hard to argue with that perception.
Samarra in central Iraq. During much of the 9th century, this was the capital of the great Sunni Abbasid dynasty, an Islamic empire that stretched from North Africa across the Middle East and into Central Asia. The Great Mosque of Samarra, completed in 851, was then the largest mosque in the world. It could hold more than 10,000 worshippers.
220 فهذه مساحة كبيرة كان المصلين يصلون بهذا المكان بحيث هذا كله
Samarra is a majority Sunni city, but it's also an important Shia pilgrimage site. They come to worship under the golden dome of the Al-Askari Mosque, one of the most sacred sites in all of Shia theology. Local Sunnis used to join them.
يودوا للضريح يزوروه ويطلع اللي يتزوج يروح يتبارك ويطلع الطفل المولود يروح للضريح يتبارك ويطلع وهذه يعني هسه يعني قلت بصراحة.
Iraq got worse today, a lot worse. Terrorists committed a uniquely shocking act of religious violence.
In 2006, 2 bombs set off by Zarqawi's Al-Qaeda in Iraq destroyed the dome. Shia took to the streets and began a new wave of sectarian reprisals. These were among the darkest days Iraq has ever endured.
The anguish and rage of the Shia crowd soon turned into bloody retaliation.
The attack has sparked rage and revenge across the country. The majority Shiites are venting their fury on the minority Sunni Muslims.
Many Iraqis have been killed in the last 2 days. 47 men were
God.
pulled from buses near Baghdad and executed. Sunni mosques are pockmarked by bullets, some still smoldering after grenade attack.
Within a week of the Samarra bombing, scores of Sunni mosques were reported attacked. Sunni imams were killed. Bodies were dragged through the streets.
Oh my lord.
The violence would only escalate. The police lost control. I was in Iraq a few months after the bombing. By that point, the bodies of Sunni men were turning up regularly on the streets of Baghdad.
Bravo, Charlie, this is Alpha. We found a dead body over.
Shia militia, many of them funded and trained by Iran, were operating death squads from within the Shia-led government.
His eyes, his ears been cut off, nose been cut off, tore off part of the skin.
You see a lot of this?
Yes. Oh.
How often do you find bodies?
My God. I'm not showing this on live. But holy shit.
every
day, every other day. First one I've seen with no face on it.
There was a particularly gruesome style of murder, basically a Shia tool where it was death by power drill. That's kind of how you could tell who was the victim. That if the guy had drill holes in his head, he was probably a Sunni, taken by the Shia. I mean, what the Sunnis did was no nicer, but it had sunk to that level. It was a horrible, horrible period.
And who were the Shiites that were doing this?
Well, there was quite a collection. Certainly, the Badrs, the Badr Brigade was involved in it.
The Badr Brigade was just one of many militias operating under the guidance of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
The IRGC is the branch of the Iranian military that does foreign operations. Not doing direct fighting themselves, but supporting allies, helping with training, helping with logistics, helping with funding. Where Iran excels is that ground game, is working with people outside of Iran's borders, being able to create actual relationships.
Energize the
and being
base.
able to get those groups to do what Iran wants to do.
There were hundreds of different armed groups. On the Shia side, far more so than on the Sunni side. And the Iranians were having a field day. playing or arming this group, contacting this group, all of them were turning back to the Iranians.
Qais al-Khazali runs one of the most powerful Iranian-backed Shia militias in Iraq today. He claims to have launched 6,000 attacks against American and allied forces. Following the bombing of Samarra, he turned his sights on al-Qaeda.
Damn.
القاعدة في ذاك الوقت
He's dedicated, I'll give him that.
شعارهم قتل الشيعة أولى من قتل الأمريكان.
What did he say?
يعني القاعدة في ذاك الوقت كانوا شعارهم قتل الشيعة أولى من قتل الأمريكان.
Khazali, who has never spoken to an American TV reporter, was open about the support Iran gave to his Shia militia.
إيران تدعم كل حركات المقاومة اللي موجودة في المنطقة. خلال فترة مقاومة الاحتلال كان لدينا علاقة جيدة مع الجمهورية الإسلامية تقوم بشيء من الدعم للمقاومة في العراق كما تدعم باقي حركات المقاومة. هذا لم يعد سرا.
The tensions are sustained by violence committed on both sides. The Shiite militias have not been disarmed. Sectarian scores are settled. From 2006 to 2007, each month, some 3,000 Iraqis were killed.
I'm just going to say it again. We just cannot take for granted that we live in relative peacetime in the United States. Like the average person living in this country never has to worry that they're going to get their house is going to explode someday, or they're going to walk outside and see some kind of slaughter happening, or that the power is going to go out for like a month, or they're not going to have water. People don't understand the depths. Even I don't. I mean, I'm watching it, I don't understand it, of like how bad civilization, like nations, can get. And this is why I'm worried about the election stuff, dude. If they successfully steal even one election in the midterms, that's like a full-blown constitutional crisis that could lead to a very scary chain of events. So I'm hoping it never gets to that point, but a civil war type scenario in the 21st century in America would be very, I don't know, just the people that are musing about like, oh yeah, bro, it's revolution time. This is why we have our Second Amendment rights. Like, it's maybe a cool aesthetic, but bro, this is like, these are families, these are people. This is not cool to just, I don't know. It's just not fun. I feel like some people think this is fun or something.
Opportunity for Iran to establish leverage over an important Arab capital, Baghdad, and that
like it goes underappreciated that our species, when we started out, we were like running around with sticks, bonking each other, stealing each other's shit. Like the fact that we now live in a relatively stable society, especially being in the West, that we don't have to deal with certain considerations on a day-to-day basis that other people have to. It's taken for granted. Institutions are taken for granted. Electricity and running water are taken for granted. Having a somewhat functioning police and private property laws and functioning hospitals and schools and roads that, I mean, potholes suck and all, but like you have to keep the severity in mind. Like and it's hard. You can't go so far in this direction where you're like, okay, yeah, we've peaked as a civilization. We don't have to fix anything anymore. You can simultaneously say we have to improve society without taking for granted how much society has improved, like dramatically, exponentially.
The Saudis to try to...
And also how privileged we are to live in the West.
And to confront Iran. This Saudi-Iranian competition
because the scale of violence we're seeing right now, this is what's, I mean, started to break out in the Middle East right now. It was already happening, but the scale of it is expanding. You see these videos of buildings on fire, and it's almost become this like aesthetic. It's like a genre of TikTok. So it's one of those videos of a building exploding. Imagine if you looked out your window and saw that, though. Like that's what that is. The distance between you and that event, because you're seeing it on a screen, can really minimize the weight of what this is. And once you start minimizing the weight of death and destruction, you start being able to justify some really crazy stuff, which it's an inevitable part of foreign policy. But right, like it's hard to be the leader of a nation state and you're making decisions that exist on such a large scale that it almost necessitates ignoring individual human cost, right? This is where the idea of like collateral damage comes in, which like in the abstract, I think everyone agrees. Where like, let's say there's a group of people and they have a nuclear weapon, and in 5 minutes they're going to press the nuclear weapon and destroy an entire country. And the only way to stop them is to do a drone strike. And there's one civilian there. But if you don't stop them, they're going to destroy 100,000 people. This is a very exaggerated example of it. In that situation, most people are like, okay, yeah, you have to accept that one civilian dying to, save however many 100,000 people. Although in real life, the calculus is never that black and white. And man, this is tough stuff. That's how I feel sometimes debunking Zionist talking points like civilian combatant ratios. Yeah, this is the thing. The underlying logic is like, I'm sure you can conceive of some scenario where some number of civilian deaths has to be acceptable. But once you start trivializing that and standardizing it to these ratios, you start going down a very scary path where all of a sudden you're justifying destroying entire civilizations. It feels very removed from the emotional weight of what we're talking about. And that's important stuff, right? The emotional weight is like, if you're sitting in some command center, you don't feel it, but like the people on the ground feel it. And that's going to have, even strategically, that emotional weight and that trauma is going to come back and manifest in geopolitical ways. It doesn't just dissipate. And it's hard to find that in the modern world. It's so hard. This is why I don't debate foreign policy. I don't, on most foreign policy questions, I'm like, I have values and principles, but applying those values and principles to the real world is very hard to do.
Access to proxy forces throughout the region. They can do the fighting on their behalf.
Within Saudi Arabia, the royals were conflicted about how to respond to the situation in Iraq.
The Saudi royal family was in a real difficult position, and it was on the defensive, worried about sanctions, worried about other forms of pressure if it were accused again of supporting violent groups like Al-Qaeda. On the other hand, it had a restive population full of radical ideas, which it had funded over many years. There were certainly some people in Saudi Arabia who thought that it was just and important to counter Iran's influence in Iraq after the U.S. invasion.
تجنبت في ذلك الأثناء عن طريق أئمة الجوامع وعن طريق الأئمة والخطباء الذين يخطبون بالجوامع الذين هم نصبتهم المملكة العربية السعودية.
This Saudi insurgent was encouraged to go to Iraq to fight the newly empowered Shia.
يحثوننا على قتال الرافضة حتى يتم خلخلة البلد يعني وهي خلخلة العراق. لذلك تم تجنيد كثير من الشباب وكنت أنا من ضمنهم.
So you had young Saudi men turning up as volunteers in Sunni territory of Iraq, facilitated by the same kinds of networks that have facilitated the jihad in Afghanistan, preaching networks, charity networks, volunteer networks.
Networks that got money from the government.
Networks that were funded by the government, very much. And those volunteers would turn up, and the next thing, a Saudi father would know, he'd be getting a call from somebody on a cell phone in Baghdad saying, your glorious son was martyred in a car bombing yesterday. Here's a video of his last moments.
From Riyadh and other Gulf capitals, money also streamed into Iraq for the Sunnis taking up arms.
الطريقة الأولى طريقة من خلال قنوات وأجهزة مخابرات. الطريقة الثانية الحقيقة من قبل رجال أعمال، يعني أنت هناك رجال أعمال حجم الزكاة. المقاومة كانت تحتاج إلى قاذفة RPG 7 وBKC ورشاشة وعبوة ناسفة، وكل هذا لا يحتاج إلى مبالغ كبيرة.
And Abdullah in particular was still so bitter toward us for having carried out the invasion in the first place. I'm sure he was paying people here and there, but without a clear policy objective that we could determine.
Paying who?
Various Sunni leaders. They were supporting the tribal leaderships. Those were the allegations. I mean, there was never any evidence for that.
I understand. There was no evidence. But what was your belief?
My belief was that the Saudis at least were not funding Al-Qaeda directly by any means. Did some of their largesse get to Al-Qaeda? Probably.
Shock and awe, but this time Sunni insurgents were sending in the bombs. The series of coordinated blasts were in mainly Shia areas and claimed more than 50 lives.
An Al-Qaeda group claimed responsibility today and warned of more attacks against Iraq's government. For his part,
Saudi Arabia was joining the great struggle against Shiism.
This is why polarization is really scary too. This is why the current times in America, I mean, not to say it would be anything near this level, but the place we're getting, I feel like something really big is going to happen this year in this country, like historical, world-changing. I'm expecting probably in November or December, and I have a very bad feeling about it.
They were successful
very bad gut
insofar
feeling.
as, the sectarian genie had been let out of the bottle.
Because if you look right now at the Trump regime, their public support is waning. Even their public support from some elected Republicans is getting weaker than it once was when Trump was at the apex of his power. And like the scary thing about Trump specifically is that as Republican elected officials start jumping ship more, that's when he goes full psycho mode. That's when he starts doing some really crazy shit, because then he's like, I have nothing to lose, right? If you look back at 2020 election, you had McConnell, you had all these Republicans saying, okay, bro, you lost. You lost the election. We're not helping you do some fuck shit here. And Mike Pence said, I'm not helping you. Bill Barr said, I'm not helping you. And it was at that moment when Trump felt like, okay, I'm cooked. My clout is gone. No one's on my side. That's when he does something like the fake elector scheme and encouraging January 6th.
In this country.
And he has a lot more resources at his disposal now. And I think he's way more hated now. And the fact that I think midterms are going to be so brutal for Republicans is why I'm worried, because you can envision a scenario where Alaska flips for the Senate, or Texas or Iowa, one of these states that like a year ago Republicans were so sure they were going to win these Senate seats. What happens if, let's just say it's like Tallarico versus Paxton, just like hypothetically, and it's like, did Tallarico just win this race by like 0.2 points against Paxton? Do we think that Republicans are going to let that happen? That Trump or Abbott would be like, yeah, we're going to let a Democrat win the Senate seat in Texas?
Has done nothing but deteriorate. From Al-Qaeda, the local insurgency, the death squads buried within this government, to Iranian
Because their back is up against the wall. And when an authoritarian's back is up against the wall, especially when he's extremely erratic and unintelligent like Trump, just stay safe.
But the Iranians had much greater influence because they had an influence over the majority Shia population.
Right-wing militia groups, yeah.
Which was Shia.
And how many of them are now state-sanctioned? How many of these people are working in ICE? We're going to... One day, they're going to run an audit on like who was hired into ICE under Trump's second term. And we're going to learn some specific numbers that I'm almost certain are going to be really disturbing about, 20% from the Proud Boys and then the Oath Keepers. And obviously I'm being a little bit, I'm like assuming a little bit the numbers, but...
At the end of that year, the Shia-led government in Baghdad cemented their power and pushed their sectarian agenda further by rushing forward to execute Saddam Hussein. It was a decision carried out despite...
God. He does not look good here. Oh my God, he looks disheveled.
U.S. and Arab concerns.
Was he bed rotting for like 2 months? This is not the Saddam Hussein I saw in the previous clip, bro.
We were worried that something will happen. We don't know if that something happened. The American will change their mind. Saddam may run away from the American prison. All sorts of things he can be done.
He was hiding out. Yeah, I know. Does anyone... I don't know how niche this is. Is anyone on the Saddam Hussein hiding spot memes? Where you have like the chicken tender that's shaped like Saddam Hussein hiding spot? Am I crazy? Am I the only one who knows this meme? Where you have like the whispering audio? I know that might sound completely crazy if you don't know what it is. I need to find this now. Someone here has to know what I'm talking about. There has to be someone. It's going to be someone under the age of like 25. You'd think everyone knows this, but as I've been learning over the last few months, my audience is very split between like millennials and Gen Xers on one end, and then like a bunch of Gen Z and Gen Alpha people. And man, there's not a lot of commonality between these audiences, I will say, except I guess that they're peaceful and patriotic, radical left lunatics and thugs. Your audience is too many normies are based, okay? You can't win in politics without normies. If you only have weirdos on your side, you're not going to be able to consolidate power, okay? Hold on. I need to find the chicken tender one. Okay. I'm gonna show you guys what this is, and I don't know what the age breakdown on this live is right now, so the vast majority of you may be confused as to why I find this funny. It's generational. Maybe I'm low IQ for enjoying this or finding it funny. It was funnier the first time I saw it than it is now, because I've seen enough of it. What the hell?
Why is this Kane's chicken tender?
What is going on, bro? Hold on. This is like a core memory of mine when I first saw this video. The music, the whispering, the oddity of it all.
Low-key serving. Is this Kane's chicken tender low-key serving Saddam Hussein's hiding spot?
Also, because it kind of is.
Why is this Kane's chicken tender low-key
Like,
serving
that's pretty
Saddam
accurate.
Hussein's hiding spot?
At least 27.2k other people agree with me this was at least worth liking, okay, in my defense. Anyways. What is this? Something is wrong with... Did my TikTok get banned or something? What is this? Why does it keep showing up? Okay.
Up on the streets of the neighborhoods in Baghdad every day. I was here, I saw it. And in the midst of this, you have a Sunni Arab leader who is up for execution. I mean, the sectarian component of this, or dimension of this, wasn't lost on you.
I can assure you that there was no shred of settling scores or revenge in my heart or in my mind when we carried the execution.
But it was just that. The government released an official video of the execution, but that is not what most of the Arab world saw and heard.
Hold on.
The government said a number of the relatives of
This
those
is why you got to watch on
who were
YouTube.
killed
YouTube
by
gets to watch Saddam Hussein's ending.
Saddam's were asked to attend his execution, but they started filming through their iPhones and so on the scene, and started shouting sectarian slogans.
Muqtada referred to the militant Shia cleric whose father had been tortured and killed by Saddam. Saddam responded, "Muqtada, is this how you show your bravery as men?"
Saddam, throughout the whole incident, handled himself very well. The rope was put around his neck. He refused the hood. He asked to be allowed to read verses from the Quran. In the meantime, this jeering, shouting crowd, hurling insults. And halfway through the reading of the Quran, the trapdoor was released.
Oh, this is a blurry ass video.
The
Oh.
only person who emerged from that scene, that piece of theater, with dignity, was the arch criminal himself, Saddam Hussein.
So you were the man that pulled the lever?
That's right.
That released the door?
Yes. And Saddam came down.
But clearly then there was a sectarian
He did come
tone
down.
to the taunting and his response.
I didn't see it that way.
Many Sunnis did see it that way. Around the world, they came out to protest. India, Sri Lanka.
Saddam Hussein had stands like that? Damn. Okay.
In the West Bank, demonstrators carried the green Saudi flag and railed against Iran and Shia. The execution was meant to mark the end of Saddam's reign of terror. Instead, he emerged as a Sunni hero who had stood up to both the Americans and their Shia partners.
Americans and their Shia partners? I guess that makes sense as the perspective in Iraq.
Really, we shouldn't have given him that status. I mean, this dictator, this criminal, to turn him into a hero, you see, and courageous with all these slogans. You see,
Have we seen proof of the unaliving of Khomeini? I don't know. I don't think
it's
so.
bad. It helped him. It damaged us.
I was physically sick that day, and any lingering doubts and hopes, etc., dissipated.
So this weighs heavily on you.
It did for many years, and naturally for a year or two I wouldn't admit to the failure in all its magnitude. But that was a turning point for me personally. It's sickening, to think that I had a role in this was.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I believed it at first either, but if I'm not mistaken, didn't Iran state media confirm the death? Wow. Great documentary. Guys, go like my comment on this video. Okay, that was part 1. How long is part 2? We're definitely not going to get through part 2. I don't even know. Okay. That might be it for today, at least for now. I'm going to be back on later with Mr. Okra on his live to cover the Texas primary. Thoughts on Hillary testifying videos? I've seen clips. I haven't seen the whole thing. Same with the Bill Clinton one. They seem extremely long. My attention span is not built for that, honestly. But damn, someone already liked my comment. What a fucking patriot. She destroyed them. Yeah, I saw the clip before with Nancy Mace. Part 2. Yeah, we'll do part 2 tomorrow maybe. Or I don't know how long I'm going to be live tonight. I'm pivoting heavily to YouTube, guys. You're going to see less of me on TikTok and Reels in the coming weeks. I figured that while I have the chorus support coming in, and I'm not dependent on my monetization for money, it's a good time to lock in on YouTube and start building some consistency on there, because I have some good ideas for YouTube videos, and ultimately, YouTube is kind of the end game. Monetization is better. The algorithm, I think, is better, more consistent algorithm. That's the plan. And I don't trust TikTok. I don't trust Instagram Reels anymore. It's just so inconsistent. So I'll try to go live here and there, and I'll post a video here and there as well. But I'm locking in on YouTube. And by the way, it will be better. When you see my dream for YouTube, you're gonna like that more than what I'm doing for TikTok. YouTube is for longevity. Yeah, exactly. Like having an established YouTube channel with even 10K views per video consistently is so much better than posting a TikTok and one gets 10,000 views and one gets 1 million views, and then one of them gets demonetized, the other one gets flagged, and it's just it's hard to have a consistent base with TikTok and Reels. Not that I won't continue doing that, but lock in on YouTube, lock in for real, because Substack is good too. It is. I'll do some Substack stuff, but my main focus right now is YouTube. Podcast genuinely coming soon. Unironically, I know I've been saying that for like a million years, but unironically, podcast coming soon, and then just more videos. Right? I figured this is a topic. I feel like I didn't milk the Andrew Wilson debate enough. I was watching part of it back yesterday, and I was like, there's so many gems in this that I just never milked at all. So I may be making a video about that somewhat soon. Just going over the the things that in the moment I didn't even realize how crazy they were. You want to see one of those things that in hindsight I'm like, wait, what? How did I not realize this in the moment? How unreal this was. Let me find it. And I'm already live on YouTube. Every live that I do on TikTok is also on YouTube.
Okay, we have like 1 minute left. That doesn't tell us what.
Bro, he unironically said this shit. Just, oh my God, what is this freeze frame?
The better. And someone could also engage with those same laws and institutions in bad faith to delegitimize them and entrench their own personal power. That doesn't tell us what bad faith means here. Oh, intentionally lying. That's all bad faith means? In this context, sure. Do you want like the etymology of the word bad faith? Kind of.
Kind of. Does everyone here know what etymology is? Like what? The study of the origin of words. I just.
Okay, we have like 1 minute left. But I mean, the thing is here is like.
Is it that crazy to say that bad faith is when someone lies? Is TikTok bugging today? I don't know. TikTok's always bugging. Yeah, I got to make a video about this. There's too many gems in this. I fully forgot. And oh my God, the brain rot in the comments just destroys my hope in this country. But yeah, you can look forward to that. Ben Shapiro video also coming soon, and then some other topic-related videos. Probably an election-related video. He's being difficult. Yeah, he's just being bad faith as fuck. I didn't even comprehend going into this or in the moment how bad faith he would be. And because he was such an unserious person, I didn't really milk the debate afterwards, because I was like, this is kind of slop. This is just such trash. Like, he's not even a serious person. So like, but in hindsight, the unseriousness of his entire engagement here is actually very funny. And this freeze frame is a pretty accurate retelling of the debate, where he's just pretending to be confused about very simple things and raging, and I'm kind of just laughing at him because my mind is boggled at how bad faith he's being, but yeah. Okay. That's all for tonight, guys. Well, actually not really. I'll be back in a bit, but stay peaceful, stay patriotic, fight like hell. We're not going to have a country anymore. If you're not already following me, you should be. And yeah, okay. And as usual, if you're watching on YouTube, you get the extra 30 seconds of content before I end the stream here. I hate that, and maybe I'm missing something. I have to first go to my YouTube live streaming page and then end the live there, or do that second after I also stop streaming on OBS. So I have to end the stream in two places, which is annoying.